Well, there are few issues that expose the sickening hypocrisy of Labor and the Greens as starkly as the issue of child sexual abuse in remote Aboriginal communities. We've heard all year about the benefits that would ensue from an Aboriginal voice to Parliament. The Australian people correctly saw through this ruse. The voice was only ever going to benefit the existing Aboriginal industry, who are already doing quite nicely, thanks very much, from the $30 to $40 billion we spend every year on various Aboriginal programs already. The people who most desperately need a voice, the children trapped in remote towns and communities, would not have got a look in. So, last week, after the Voice referendum was rejected, Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price rose in the Senate and proposed that these poor, lonely, frightened and abused kids get an official voice of their own.
Nampijinpa-Price.
Thank you, Mr President. I rise today to speak on the urgent need for Prime Minister Albanese and the Labor government to support the Coalition's call for a Royal Commission into child sexual abuse in Indigenous communities, audit spending on Indigenous programs and support practical policy ideas to improve the lives of Indigenous Australians to help close the gap.
It is beyond sickening that Labor and the Greens span this into a political issue rather than a compassionate one and turned it down. It's alarming that we still know so little about what these kids are enduring. In 2001, New South Wales Liberal Senator Bill Heffernan visited remote communities in New South Wales and Queensland and reviewed what little literature existed then to compile a report called Child Sexual Abuse in Rural and Remote Australian Indigenous Communities. What he found was a stain on Australia. He found that sexual abuse of children often went on for years. The offenders included government employees working with the Child Protection Department. Let that sink in. Aboriginal land councils, high-profile Aboriginal leaders and unemployed men. They could be Indigenous or non-Indigenous. Many of them were outsiders who visited the communities, ingratiating themselves and then taking the opportunity when it arose. Stories of predators suddenly leaving town once they were exposed were common. Quote from the report, "The social isolation, the oppressed conditions and the poor health status of some Indigenous communities help to nurture an environment that attracts the predatory movement." Put yourself in the shoes of the kids living in these towns. They are alone in a place without hope or even joy, with no means of escape, and they are regularly visited by sexual predators taking advantage of their vulnerability. Worse, some of the predators are family members. Heffernan quoted Natunga Phillips, who wrote this in 1996. It's a long quote, but it needs to be repeated in full. "Aboriginal family and kinship are the very core of the Aboriginal psyche. It is a way of being. Therefore, when a client's family member has sexually abused or abused in any way the client, then the world view and Aboriginal community safety for the client is indeed nothing short of shattered. The client often feels a great sense of loss, and loss of identity is also a huge struggle for them. They don't know where they belong, and families often feud over the assault or abuse. Usually in this feuding, the client is very often forgotten about, and this results further in serious psychiatric disorders. Sexual abuse survivors or victims who were subjected to the abuse for long periods of time over years by a person in a position of trust tended to end up with serious psychiatric disorders, and more than not, many were now in psych wards or had at one period, if not more, had been in psych wards. Well, you'd have to be a Labor or Greens voter not to be deeply disturbed by that grim description.